What if I told you that one of the most powerful women in history once lost everything? Her throne, her home, even her safety, and had to sneak back into her own palace hidden inside a carpet, just to survive. This is not a myth. This is the story of Cleopatra VII, a queen who refused to disappear. Long before she became a legend, Cleopatra was just a young girl growing up in the magnificent city of Alexandria. Alexandria was not like other cities. It was full of life, knowledge, and power. Traders came from distant lands. Scholars filled its famous library. The air carried the sound of many languages. Cleopatra loved it. But while the city was alive with ideas, the palace she lived in was filled with fear. Her father, Ptolemy XII, was the king of Egypt, but not a strong one. He depended heavily on Rome, and many people saw him as weak. Cleopatra noticed everything. She saw how people talked behind her father's back. She saw how quickly respect could disappear. She saw how power could slip away. And even as a child, she understood something most adults ignored. Being born into power does not mean you get to keep it. Unlike other princesses, Cleopatra did not spend her days dreaming about luxury. She studied. She learned Greek, Egyptian, and several other languages. She read about history, politics, and philosophy. She listened carefully when advisors spoke. She trained her mind. Because deep inside, Cleopatra made a quiet promise. She would never be a weak ruler. Then one day, everything changed. Her father lost the throne. The people of Egypt had had enough. There were riots in the streets, anger filled the city, and in the end, Ptolemy XII was forced to run away, to Rome. For Cleopatra, this was a terrifying moment. A king running for his life, a ruler with no power. For a while, Cleopatra remained in Egypt. She watched closely as the kingdom struggled without a strong leader. This was her first real lesson in politics. Power is not stable. It can disappear overnight. But Rome had its own plans. With the help of Roman forces, her father returned and took back the throne. It was clear now, Egypt was not truly independent. Rome was the real power behind everything. Cleopatra never forgot that. Years passed, and when her father died, Cleopatra's moment finally came. At just 18 years old, she became queen. But there was a problem. She was not allowed to rule alone. According to tradition, she had to share power and even marry her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. It was not love, it was control. At first, Cleopatra tried to take charge. She believed she could rule better than her brother, and she was probably right. But power is never that simple. Ptolemy XIII had advisors, older, experienced men who feared Cleopatra. They saw her intelligence as a threat, so they began to act. Quietly at first, they questioned her decisions, ignored her orders, turned her brother against her. Step by step, they pushed her out, until one day, she was no longer queen. Cleopatra was forced to flee Egypt. She lost her throne, her palace, her position. For many, this would have been the end of the story. But for Cleopatra, it was just the beginning. She escaped to the eastern desert, near Syria. There, far from everything she once had, she began to rebuild. She gathered loyal followers. She raised an army. She made a plan. Because Cleopatra understood something important. If you want power, you must be willing to fight for it. But she also knew the truth. Egypt alone was not enough. If she wanted to win, she needed something bigger. She needed Rome. At that time, Rome was in chaos. Two powerful men were fighting for control, Julius Caesar and Pompey. Their war would decide the future of Rome, and possibly Egypt. When Pompey lost, he ran to Egypt, hoping for safety. But what happened next shocked the world. The advisors of Ptolemy XIII made a terrible decision. They killed Pompey. They believed it would impress Caesar. They were wrong. When Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt and saw what had been done, he was not pleased. But more importantly, he saw opportunity. A divided kingdom, a weak ruler, a chance to control Egypt. And Cleopatra? She saw something else. A door. The most powerful man in the world was now in her country. This was her chance to return. But it was also dangerous. If she entered the palace openly, she could be killed. So she made a decision, bold, risky, and unforgettable. Under the cover of night, Cleopatra was secretly carried into the palace where Caesar was staying. Hidden inside a carpet, or a bundle of cloth, she passed through guards unnoticed. No army, no crown, just courage. When the bundle was opened, Cleopatra stepped out, not as a victim, not as a defeated queen, but as a leader. Imagine that moment. A young woman surrounded by enemies standing face to face with the most powerful man alive. She did not beg. She did not show fear. She spoke. Clearly, calmly, confidently. She told her story. She showed her vision. She proved her worth. And Caesar listened. Because Cleopatra was not just beautiful. She was intelligent, sharp, different, unforgettable. That night changed everything. Cleopatra had taken her first step back toward power. But she had also stepped into something far bigger, a relationship that would shake Egypt and change Rome forever. She risked her life to meet the most powerful man in the world. But what if that meeting didn't just save her throne? What if it started a war, a love story, and a chain of events that would shake both Egypt and Rome? The night Cleopatra VII stood before Julius Caesar was not just bold, it was calculated. She didn't come to beg, she came with a plan. Caesar was not easily impressed. He had seen kings fall and empires rise. He understood power better than most men alive. But Cleopatra was different. She didn't flatter him, she didn't fear him, she spoke to him as an equal. She explained how Egypt was divided, how her brother had taken control unfairly, and how the kingdom needed strong leadership, her leadership. Caesar listened carefully, because he didn't just see a young queen, he saw an opportunity. Egypt was rich, full of grain, gold, and strategic power. Rome depended on it. If Egypt became unstable, Rome would suffer. But if Egypt was ruled by someone loyal to him, that would change everything. So Caesar made a decision. He would not ignore this conflict. He would control it. Meanwhile, tension exploded inside Alexandria. When Ptolemy XIII discovered that Cleopatra had returned and that Caesar was supporting her, he was furious. To him, this was betrayal. To his advisors, it was a crisis. Because now, this was no longer just a family fight. This was Rome versus Egypt. Ptolemy's advisors gathered an army. Their plan was simple: surround Caesar, destroy Cleopatra, take full control of Egypt. And just like that, war began. The battle for Alexandria was chaotic. The streets turned into war zones. Fires spread across buildings. People ran in fear. Soldiers fought in narrow alleys and along the harbor. Caesar was in danger. He had only a small number of troops. He was far from Rome, and he was surrounded by enemies. One wrong move, and everything could end. During this chaos, tragedy struck. The famous Library of Alexandria. one of the greatest centers of knowledge in the world, was caught in the flames. Scrolls filled with history, science, and stories were destroyed. Knowledge that had taken centuries to build, lost in days. But the war did not stop. Caesar fought carefully. He defended his position, waited for reinforcements, and slowly pushed back. And Cleopatra? She stayed. She did not run to safety. She did not hide behind walls. Instead, she remained close to Caesar, watching, learning, understanding war not just as violence, but as strategy. This was not just about survival anymore. This was about power. And somewhere in the middle of chaos, something unexpected grew. Trust. Cleopatra and Caesar began to understand each other in a way few people could. They were both ambitious, both intelligent, both willing to take risks others would never dare. And slowly, their alliance became something more personal. For Cleopatra, this connection meant security. With Caesar by her side, she was no longer alone. She had Rome's strength behind her. For Caesar, Cleopatra was more than just a political ally. She was fascinating. Her intelligence, her confidence, her ability to think ahead, it all stood out. She wasn't like anyone else he had met. But their growing connection came with danger, because power always attracts enemies. The war reached its final stage near the Nile River. Caesar's forces finally faced the army of Ptolemy XIII in a decisive battle. It was intense, fast, unforgiving. In the end, Ptolemy XIII lost. As he tried to escape across the Nile, his boat overturned. And just like that, the young king disappeared beneath the water. The war was over. Cleopatra had won. But her victory was not simple. It came with a price. It came with dependence, because now her power was tied to Caesar. Cleopatra returned to the throne, but this time she ruled differently. She was stronger, more confident, more strategic. And she was not alone. To follow Egyptian tradition, she officially married another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. But everyone understood the truth. The real alliance was with Caesar. Soon after, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Ptolemy XV Caesarion. She claimed he was Caesar's child. If true, this was a powerful move, because this child connected Egypt directly to Rome. Now, Cleopatra was not just a queen. She was building a future, a legacy. But while Egypt was becoming stable again, Rome was becoming dangerous. After some time, Julius Caesar returned to Rome, and he invited Cleopatra to visit him there. This was not just a visit. It was a statement. When Cleopatra arrived in Rome, people noticed immediately. She was different. Her clothing, her style, her confidence, it all stood out. Some people admired her, others feared her, and many whispered, "Who is this queen? And how much power does she have over Caesar?" Rome was not used to powerful foreign women, and Cleopatra was not someone easy to ignore. Caesar honored her publicly. He even placed a statue of Cleopatra in a temple dedicated to Venus. This shocked many Romans, because it was more than respect. It looked like devotion, and that made people uncomfortable. Behind closed doors, enemies began to talk. They saw Caesar gaining too much power, too much influence, too much control. And Cleopatra? She was now standing right in the middle of it all. She had fought her way back to the throne. She had formed a powerful alliance. She had secured her future. But she had also stepped into the most dangerous place in the world, Roman politics. And in Rome, power does not last forever. She had power. She had love. She had the future of two empires in her hands. So how did it all end with a single, silent decision? One that turned Cleopatra VII into a legend forever. Rome was changing. When Cleopatra VII arrived in Rome, she entered a world full of power, but also full of fear. At the center of it all stood Julius Caesar. He was stronger than ever, victorious in war, loved by many, feared by even more. But there was a problem. In Rome, no one trusted a man who became too powerful. People began to whisper, "Is Caesar trying to become a king? Is he forgetting Rome's traditions? And who is that Egyptian queen always by his side?" Cleopatra could feel the tension. She understood politics. She knew what happens when power grows too quickly. Enemies rise. And then, it happened. On a day that would change history forever, during the Ides of March, Caesar walked into the Senate. He never walked out. A group of senators surrounded him. Among them were men he trusted, men he believed were loyal. They attacked him. Again and again. Caesar fell. And with him, Cleopatra's strongest protection disappeared. News spread fast. Rome was no longer safe. Not for Cleopatra. Not for her son Ptolemy XV Caesarion. She didn't wait. She didn't argue. She left. Cleopatra returned to Egypt, but everything had changed. She was still queen, but now she was alone, or so it seemed. In Rome, a new power struggle began. After Caesar's death, 3 men rose to control the empire: Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. But among them, one would change Cleopatra's life forever: Mark Antony. Years later, Cleopatra was called to meet him, not as a lover, as a ruler. She arrived in a way no one could forget, sailing up the river on a magnificent ship dressed like a goddess, surrounded by luxury and beauty. It was not just an entrance, it was a message. She was still powerful. Mark Antony was impressed, but more importantly, he was intrigued. Their meeting was supposed to be political, but just like before, it became something more. Cleopatra and Mark Antony formed an alliance, then a relationship, then something deeper. Together they dreamed big, not just ruling Egypt, not just influencing Rome, but building a new future where their power combined could rival anyone. Cleopatra gave birth to children with Antony. Their bond grew stronger. Their ambitions grew bigger. But there was a problem. His name was Octavian. Octavian was young, but extremely smart, cold, patient, dangerous. He saw Antony's relationship with Cleopatra as a threat, not just personal, political. So he did something clever. He didn't attack immediately. He used words, stories, propaganda. He told the people of Rome, Antony is no longer loyal to Rome. He is controlled by Cleopatra. He wants to make Egypt stronger than Rome. The people began to believe it. Fear grew. Anger followed. And soon, war became inevitable. The final battle came at sea, the famous Battle of Actium. Cleopatra and Antony stood together against Octavian. It was a battle that would decide everything: power, empire, legacy. But things went wrong. During the battle, Cleopatra's fleet suddenly retreated. Historians still argue why. Fear? Strategy? A mistake? Antony saw her ships leaving, and instead of continuing the fight, he followed her. That moment changed everything. Without strong leadership, their forces collapsed. Octavian won. Cleopatra and Antony fled back to Egypt, but they both knew the truth. It was over. Octavian was coming, and he would not show mercy. In Alexandria, the final chapter began. Antony, hearing a false rumor that Cleopatra was dead, made a tragic decision. He took his own life. But Cleopatra was still alive. When she found him, it was too late. The man she loved was gone. Now she was alone again, facing the most powerful man in the world. Octavian entered Egypt. He captured Cleopatra, but he did not kill her. He had another plan. He wanted to take her to Rome, to display her as a symbol of his victory, a queen turned into a trophy. But Cleopatra was not that kind of ruler. She had not fought her entire life just to be humiliated. So she made one final decision. According to legend, Cleopatra chose death. Some say by poison, others say by a snake, the famous asp. We may never know the exact truth, but we know this: she chose her own ending. Cleopatra died as she lived, on her own terms. Soon after, her son Ptolemy XV Caesarion was killed. With that, her dynasty ended. Egypt became part of Rome. But Cleopatra? She became something more. Not just a queen, not just a ruler, a legend. A woman who used intelligence, courage, and strategy to stand against the most powerful empire in the world. A woman who refused to be forgotten. And even today, her story still lives.